Welcome to Simply Pickleball, the podcast where we discuss all things pickleball, the fastest growing sport in America and around the world. We're interviewing the founders, industry leaders, athletes, lovers of the sport that are driving this spectacular growth. If you love pickleball as much as we do, listen in. Hi, I'm Crystal Brown, your host, and I'm thrilled to have spent time with Josh Kim, the founder of Spartus Pickleball Paddles. Have you ever wondered what your paddle is made of or how it's constructed? Well, today you're going to hear a little bit about Josh's journey to becoming a founder, how he grew to love pickleball, and learn a little bit more about how paddles are made. Okay, now to the show. Thank you, Josh. I'm really excited to talk to you today about your company and appreciate you taking the time out of your day because I know being an entrepreneur is really time consuming, unless, of course, it's about pickleball, and then you probably make a lot of time to play pickleball.
Thanks for having me.
So I met you on the pickleball court with your company, Spartus, and super excited to learn about how you got it started and about you and your background. And maybe, can you just tell me a little bit about, what were you doing before you started a paddle company and then how you got started on Spartus?
I'm going to preface by saying that to most people from the outside, my career path looks like random dots, but I promise you it'll connect if I give you.
Yes.
Okay, so let me start way back because it's relevant to Spartus. College, I studied biomedical engineering. So it's a mix of, mechanical engineering, material science and things like that. So I had a touch of education behind sort of some of the stuff I'm doing. But the biggest piece of education I learned back then, first semester in college, and I promise all of this ties back, just bear with me. First semester.
That's great.
Yeah. I was one of those kids, in high school, I got perfect SATs, perfect everything. In college, you sort of experience freedom, like pure freedom for the first time. So
I
was partied in high school, but not to the extent, in college. So I wasn't doing well in first semester in college. So my dad, he was an executive at one of the largest Korean mobile phone manufacturers. So he sent me to the factory for the summer because he was like, maybe you'll get a taste of, what you need to understand what education is about. Why don't you get a taste of blue collar work to see if that's what you like? So I wake up at the crack of dawn to ride the bus to rural, remote area where the factory was. And I was literally part of the factory line for everyone using the phones. And little did I know, 15 years later, that experience in the factory line will give me a taste of understanding now that I'm working, building my own products, how, the supply chain works. As an American, you don't know that. It's really hard for Americans to just assume that there's people behind, hand manufacturing everything.
Yeah.
That there's specialized machines when there's not at all.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, so I thought that was really cool. I was talking to my dad about this recently, but so I did.
Yeah, I absolutely, by the way, just totally agree that some of these early experiences that you don't know when they're going to come back around for you. Absolutely. So that's really interesting, and good for him for giving you some real world experience.
Yeah. So after that sort of turned my, perspective around. Did well in college. After that, I went to law school. I did intellectual property law for 3.5 years. Some of my specialties were in biotech, but I also worked a lot with material science. So again, for that time, as a lawyer, I was, very familiar with R&D practices because I'm only talking with inventors day in, day out.
Wow.
Yeah. And then, during that time, I got really, really lucky. In my second year, I was on a high profile Supreme Court case, and I was one of two lead attorneys bringing Narcan into the States. And I realized I was a junior associate at the time. Again, this is purely by fortune. I landed on these cases. I realized this is not the career path for me because, 10 years down the line, when you're a partner, you're still doing that kind of work. It sounds interesting. Most people enjoy it, but I wanted more creative spaces, work on sort of things that interest me rather than, working for your partner who's working for a client. It was, I realized pretty quickly, it's not what I'm going to enjoy for the rest of my life. The pay was there, the prestige was there, all of that, but, those aren't really, doesn't really line up with my value system. So I went to business school. I went to Northwestern to get my business degree and my MBA. That was a really good time. Really enjoyed Evanston. Chicago, I still miss the Chicago summers, to be honest.
Well, they certainly have to be better than the San Francisco summers.
And then I worked a year in private equity. When I moved over here after my time in Chicago, one of my buddies, who was a co-founder of Square, had a new startup at the time here. and he asked me to be the COO of his company. It was called Volley, and we were really lucky to be able to sell that company 10 months after I joined. Marqeta, which is not a public company, bought us out.
Mm-hmm.
So part of the deal was we had to work for Marqeta. So I was at Marqeta for a little less than a year before I was recruited by another Square guy who had another early stage startup. I was his COO for 2 years. Scaled out his company from literally 0 to 12 million ARR. So annual recurring revenue with over 100,000 paid users from 0. So that was my role at that company. Basically, 50% of the company reported into me. My primary role was to get to those big milestones. Yeah, and those 4 or 5 years in fintech or early stage startups was like pretty grueling. It was really taxing, but even more so when I was a lawyer. I was working basically to midnight every single day. Barely went out, took no breaks.
It's interesting because I think that is the startup story for a lot of people. They don't see the grind and the hustle in the beginning. They only see the success later.
Yeah, the thing is, my friends and I are not very media-based folks, so you don't hear us, going after media stories all the time. Whereas, like the ones that you see on TechCrunch all the time, it's people always like talking about their wins all the time, and you're not going to cover, the hard periods that you're going through, just day in, day out.
Yes.
It was fire on fire, especially when you're working with a lean team and you got to make it work.
Totally.
It was super fun. It was super rewarding. And the experience there, and as a lawyer, and in private equity, and in the factory line, all carried over to what I'm doing now. So after I left Grid, I needed a break. So I was, on a sabbatical, just chilling. One of my friends from business school, she always asked me to play tennis with her, and I grew up playing tennis a lot.
Did you? Yeah, I was going to ask you if you were a racket sport person.
It was a time when I was way more fit than I am now. I'm trying to get back there. It's hard when you're 35. Playing tennis, but she introduced me to pickleball. Like she had started this pickleball group that I told you about.
Yeah.
On Thursday nights. So I was like, okay, sure. I have a lot of time. I can, it sounds interesting. I went, and the first time I went, I immediately realized why it's picking up steam. It was so obvious to me. Like I couldn't tell just by looking at it, because coming from tennis, you expect like explosive sports, things like that. And when you watch it from afar, you're like, oh, is that sort of like,
right.
sport? Until you get on the court yourself, and then you realize, whoa, there is a lot of competition. The best part from my perspective was people who pick up a pickleball paddle for the first time, feel like they can get the ball over the net pretty quickly. Whereas in tennis, you need months and months of lessons.
Right. That's a good point. So like a low barrier to entry to just get started. Yeah. Good point.
Exactly. And the social aspect is the best part. You're never going to see people at the tennis courts behaving the way.
I know. So, you hear people like hooting and hollering and laughing and cheering each other on. And the minute there's a good point, it's like, everyone else knows around that it happened.
Yeah. I saw this really, really cool quote yesterday online. And so basically the premise of the first poster was like, is it okay to play with strangers in pickleball? I'm just starting. And one of the people that commented below that was like, when I first started, I played only with strangers, but now I play with friends.
That's so nice.
Yeah, and that was my experience in the Presidio too. Like aside from the friends that I already had, like I know a lot of the people there, so do everyone there just by being there all the time. Everyone.
That's a really good point. And I think just to highlight that, I've traveled around playing pickleball in a couple different cities. And what I find is like, there's so many different ages, and you might hang out with someone playing pickleball that you would never interact with otherwise. And if you're alone or lonely, you just go to the pickleball court. Or if you have a group of friends, you can go to the pickleball court. So I think it does cross a range of people playing. You're so right, comparing it to tennis, very different sport.
Yeah, 100%. It's a big social club. Yeah. So while I was playing, obviously, as you advance the skill, I was playing with my friend's paddle at the time. She just lent me it all the time. I think it was like the Onyx Z5, one of the ones a lot of people started with. I personally didn't like the feel of it. I wanted something where I could get better feel. So I started looking into, what paddles are in the market that's more, up market, sort of more premium. So back then, that was when Engage was still like a very popular company. CRBM was like, up on the rise, things like that. And then I was looking at this carbon paddles and some of the other ones out there. It was, based on my experience, in this, in the factory line and just my understanding of R&D, it seemed pretty clear to me that a lot of these paddles was sort of being built in the same places. This is before the market became aware of this. As a matter of fact, one of my posts on subreddit Pickleball is the third most liked post on that subreddit, and I talk about this in detail there. I was like, hey, you know what? I confirmed that by sort of contacting a lot of these factors until I felt very comfortable thinking that, yeah, these factors are making, this factory makes carbons, this factory, makes cell kirks, China made ones, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, based on the price margins, like the margins that they're making is way too high. My primary line of thinking there was tennis rackets right now in this day cost around $250 if you want to get one of the Wilson's like premium rackets, right? I've been using the same two Wilson end blades for 12 years now. I restraightened it for a bit. Pickleball paddles also are $250, right?
Right.
So $333. Like, for example, if you buy like the Cell Kirk, projects. And I was like, well, you can't replace, you had to replace the whole paddle when it's worn.
Right. You can't, there's no restringing it.
Yeah. So from like an economic standpoint, it didn't fit within like the structures that, I had in my head, especially when I was working in private equity. I also saw a very fragmented market with, right now there's like 1,000 different manufacturers, but back then there was maybe 100. And normally when you see these like fragmented markets, a lot of private equity people will tell you there's a roll-up opportunity. What that means is, someone comes in and starts to, just little M&As basically.
Right.
So that's not what I was thinking, but I was thinking there's an opportunity,
So wait, just explain that a little bit more. So you mean, basically one bigger brand will end up kind of buying up some of the smaller brands and then consolidate?
There's that, or usually there's a third party that comes in to do that, which is
I see.
Usually middle market private equity firms.
Gotcha. Interesting.
Basically their focus is sort of get one of the line items down and then increase the profits that way, and then they could boost the entire value of the whole portfolio.
Gotcha. So going back to, what you, just to be clear, what you were seeing in the beginning was a bunch of rackets paddles. I keep saying that because people keep asking me about rackets.
Mainly because we use it, so I know people were.
I was looking at search terms, and actually a lot of people do search for pickleball rackets, but it is a paddle. So with the paddles, they were basically being manufactured in the same way, just different branding. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, and the problem I had personally, I think this is where like my lawyer side comes in, is like there was a little bit, in my view, of like mismarketing going on. Mm-hmm. These companies were like, oh, this is brand new stuff. It's like the logo is new, and that's right. So part of the goal was not only bring a really good value to the market, but also design it in a way that I thought actually looks good. That was a sort of secondary objective of mine. I just personally thought a lot of the paddles didn't have good design, like aesthetic elements. Mm-hmm. But the primary focus was to bring value to the market. Like I want to make sure that the consumers get, the most value for their dollar. And I didn't see that at the time. And right now you're starting to see that needle move in that direction far, far faster, because of companies like mine, Vatic Pro, Rhombus, Legacy, the much higher performing paddles than, Carbon, which is, it's 50% more expensive, sometimes 100%.
So tell me about that construction. So how did you figure out what the construction was that was going to work best? And, because a lot of consumers, maybe after they're a beginner, they might just buy sort of a paddle or borrow friends like you did. But after that, they have this question. It's like, which paddle should I buy? And, how did you figure out the construction for Spartus that you felt was going to perform the best?
For sure. I'll start with the first model, and then the black one, the ballista that your boyfriend used, because that was a very different process. So the Gladius is something like a lot of other companies did. You can just I selected something because I wasn't very familiar at the time with all the different, techs out there. So I went safe, very risk-free. And the whole goal for that was to bring value to the market. So the only adjustment I really did is sort of lower the swing weight a little bit by pushing the center of mass a little bit down. Mm-hmm. That was just personal preference. I thought there was a lot of players switching over from tennis like myself who's going to be more familiar with the lower swing weight. However, so I'm open about this, that, if you want like basically a carbon paddle for way less, go with Gladius. It's the same thing.
And why carbon? Like, does that, I use a carbon surface paddle myself, and hopefully I'll use yours. But why is that important?
So what I was talking about carbon previously was the company CRBN, but
okay.
Yes, carbon fiber on the face is right now the most popular premium, material for the faces of like more higher performing models. And there's a few reasons. First is there's regulations that the USAP mandates that you have to fall within for your paddle to be approved.
Gotcha.
And one of them is the stiffness of the paddle. So there's something called deflection. And the best way to think about this is if your paddle sort of has a trampoline effect, your paddle will fail. So the stiffness of the paddle matters. And so far, the industry has found that a certain type of carbon fiber, which is called T700, has a very good mix of stiffness, and durability. For example, if you go to T800, it's too brittle. It might be a little bit stiffer, but you're going to find that it actually shatters at times.
Interesting.
T700 has been consistently shown to have properties where you're going to have the stiffness that falls within USAP regulations without the deflection and has a durability to get you what you want. Second is you can apply grit to it into the carbon fiber itself. There's also regulations around how much grit you can have, but the carbon fiber and certain other materials, you can basically max it out without failing.
Gotcha.
That's why carbon fiber is really popular. When you compare it to like fiberglass, most of the time, most people will say you get more feel off the face. I would say like 98-99% of people would say
Gotcha.
that.
So both your paddles are with the carbon construction.
That's right.
Carbon surface.
Although we use a proprietary layer on top of the ballista that we've been testing for months that we found actually has better grit properties than raw fiber on its own. And there's a misconception in the market around exactly what raw carbon fiber means. A lot of people in the market actually thinks that raw carbon fiber is just how carbon fiber is naturally. The grit is actually formed when you put like this matrix on the curing of the carbon fiber. So it's not the carbon fiber is still treated, and the particles come off as the ball hits it. So that's why even with any my Gladius or any other company's carbon fiber paddles, you'll start to see it smooth out because that's inevitable.
Well, so that was the question I had. So, how long can someone use their paddle? I mean, what's our expectation, right? You said you have your tennis racket for 12 years, but I mean, I see people moving through paddles right now because there's so many coming out that people want to try to, they somehow think the paddle's going to really up their game. And maybe it does. I'm not saying it does not impact your game. I think it for sure it can, but I think there's a lot of other things that you need to do to get to be a great player.
I'm going to be the first to say that if you expect a paddle to make you a 4-0 player from a 3-5 player, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Not at all. There's no equipment out there that's going to suddenly change your game. It's going to change your feel.
Yeah.
The way you feel about yourself playing. It's going to change how, the ball feels for you.
Yeah.
And that way it might be a better fit for how, natural your swing is at that point. Things like that.
Yeah.
If you expect a paddle to suddenly make the ball go at 100 miles an hour every time, that's a machine.
So you started with your sort of first one. And for a lot of entrepreneurs, what do they say? If you're not embarrassed to put out your first product, then you waited too long. So in some ways it's like, done is better than perfect. You put something out really thoughtful and then you learn from it and then you create the second one. And that's sort of where you are right now.
Yeah. Well, the first one I was very confident in the value because this is before a lot of the value companies started coming in. I was literally one of the first, me and Bombas.
That's awesome.
We were really fortunate to be able to build up an online reputation. I tell people this right now, like had I started today or even in June, I don't think I would have been able to launch like properly at all. I think I would have failed with the amount of saturation and how skeptical even like Reddit or Discord communities are at this point. And the way that we built up the reputation was purely through transparency. I just was very open about even my cost structure to the user base on Discord, on Reddit. Again, one of my posts was the third most liked post in all of that subreddit's history.
That's awesome.
I didn't intend it for that. It's just how I am.
Well, I think people want transparency, and they want to be educated. They want to understand.
Yeah, and I think it's purely the consumer's choice. Like, you like what you hear, you can buy it. If you don't like it, sure, go somewhere else. It's fine with me. I also didn't like how a lot of companies were sort of riding the pickleball wave in the beginning, sort of saying some mistruths, and I didn't want to fall into that pattern.
Totally.
Yeah. The second paddle, the Ballista, this one is cool because this is built from the ground up. This is after my team, especially me, got a better understanding of all of the process, all of the materials. The final version is almost a 20th iteration.
Wow.
6 months. We spent a ton of time building out paddles. Takes a long time because especially when you start quote unquote thermoforming, if you heard of that term.
No, I don't know.
Yeah, so that's the generation 2 paddles. So when you think about Legacy Pro, the CRBM 1X, the Power Edition, the Batic Pro, the 6-0 Double Black Diamond, those are the ones that are dominating the new market right now. So basically the only difference between that and the Gen 1 paddles is you take carbon fiber and you also put it around the entire paddle, then you put it into a custom mold, and then you heat press it for 15 to 30 minutes at a very high temperature. So carbon fiber has a negative coefficient of thermoplasticity. What that means is most materials will become bigger when you heat it, but carbon fiber actually shrinks. It's very interesting.
Interesting.
It makes it stiffer. So when you see people on the court with the Legacy Pro, you can notice that the ball just bounces off, right? Because it's thermoform. On the flip side, because of the manufacturing process used, they end up becoming delaminated at a fairly high rate. Delamination is when the base separates from the core, and that is illegal. So there was problems with that.
Oh, interesting.
A lot of them have been able to solve a lot of that. We don't have that issue because of the materials and the delamination issues we do. Anyway, so we also thermoform this, although that's not a highlight of the Ballista. Basically, we were playing around. I think the process is basically anything you do in science, right? You come up with a hypothesis. You have a baseline understanding.
Right.
Hypothesis. And then you see if it comes out in reality and you make your adjustments. And that was a process for 18 times over 6 months.
Wow. And so you're, and this bracket's it's not out on the market yet. You're pre-selling, right?
It's for pre-sales, but the demand was quite high on the first, like literally once we opened the gate. So we already increased the production on day one,
that's great,
because we didn't think we can fulfill all the orders from the first batch that will come in. So lucky for us, that's the situation right now. But we hope that the customers really, really see the value and see the performance of this. So far, the play testers have been posting online about the performance, so people are starting to.
I can tell you that my partner, as soon as he played with it, he was like, I don't want to play with anything else. So he was ready. He was ready. So where do you see, as a company, so what I didn't understand before, and I do understand now, is really trying to target the value market and, or provide value so that you can have mass adoption. And how do you see yourself growing as a company? Do you think that you'll come out with more and more rackets? Do you think that you'll just keep perfecting the one? Sorry, why do I keep saying rackets? Paddles.
A lot of people say that. It's fine.
I know, but I've never played a racket sport, so it's just. So do you think you'll come out with more paddles? It's just sort of like, what's the arc? What would be your hope for what comes next?
We actually have two more paddles that's going to be released pretty quickly after this one. It's already we just need to submit it for the USAP testing, and then in a manner that makes sense for the business in terms of timing. In terms of, and I can give you details on that because we've been fairly open about it on the internet. So,
even brands where, like if you look at a Selkirk paddle, some of them have very different grips, some of them have different weights, and curious how you chose your weight. So it wouldn't be surprising to me if you have a few different paddles. For whatever reason, I need a very light paddle, and some people really do, to avoid, what's now probably pickleball elbow, but used to be called tennis elbow.
Weight wise, I can give you a little insight on some of the stuff we did. There was one point, I think back in, when was it? Late January, we actually did manufacture and test a 7.15 ounce paddle, way lighter.
What's typical? What would be a typical paddle?
So 7.9 to 8.1 is the usual threshold. A lot of pros like to weight it out, put more weight to get the 8.4 range. Obviously, there's sort of several reasons they do that. They want to expand the sweet spot while increasing the power. If you watch a lot of the pros, they have much shorter swings than many players do. So you get sort of a little bit less, sometimes, So basically they have their different, each player has a different reason for doing that. But the standard weight is between 7.9 and 8.1 ounce. 8.15, I can tell you, from a lot of the play testers, it was too light. It generated way too little power. And the energy absorption was not there.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really hard to feel the ball from their perspective. Now, people with tennis elbow or pickleball elbow, I'm sure, would appreciate that.
Well, there's such a range of players. So, if in terms of like how you think about targeting, like, are you going to be able to make everyone happy, or do you try to put out the best paddle that would be for anyone to play with?
Yeah, right now the two dimensions that we focus on is performance and value. So there's hopefully maybe come a time where we can, have some paddles sort of focus more on pickleball, elbow, and things like that. One of the guys I met with recently, I randomly met the senior vice president for Engage 3 days ago, and he was I don't know why, but he was encouraging me to build like one of those practice paddles where like the head is like this big.
Oh, I've never heard of those.
Yeah, me too. He kept trying to convince me that they're super popular, and I was like, well, okay, I'm not sure where they're popular.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look at that. I have to look that up. But I mean, so you were saying like for your next iterations of paddles, how do you think about going from? I mean, you haven't even put out the Ballista yet, but everyone's eagerly awaiting. But what comes next, or what do you hope?
Yeah, so hopefully we get the Ballista out into the market, and it's well adopted. The next two paddles we have are a thermoform, so a hot molded version of our Gladius. That was a natural one to build, given basically everyone's moved on to Gen 2. And then the third one is we want to move the Gladius to like basically a starter level paddle. So we've been working on the upside to bring our cogs down. So we were able to bring our costs down quite significantly recently. So we can actually introduce a little bit more tech into the Gladius, and then set the price down lower to make it even more of an entry. So basically, there'll be no reason to like try out like the Onyx C5, for example.
That's awesome. And so where are you selling your product right now?
Right now, it's only on our website, although there are, and then we have some wholesale deals with some distributors out there. And then there is a couple drop ship partnerships we've been trying out, like Infinite Pickleball, but primarily I would say 99% of our sales are straight through our website. So
tell me about what you see the future of sort of for you. Like, because this can turn into, a much bigger company, selling all types of things. You can continue to do paddles. Maybe a pro starts playing with your paddle. I mean, what would be the vision for you? What do you hope happens? I actually ask this question quite frequently, and it's really. Oh, really? Yeah, it's hard to answer. I mean, I'll start with the latter sub question, because we do have other stuff in the works, like apparel is coming up. I personally, don't want to. I as an individual don't want to touch that, but we just have too much requests coming in for that. Mm-hmm. I have a bunch of samples of shirts. We've actually been giving out a lot of those for free until we get to like, a shirt that we think is worth like, putting out into the market for, yeah. And then a bag, pickleball bags are coming up too. But in terms of the, overall question about, scalability of the company, things like that. I really like, small companies. Personally, I think I sort of shared with you, my career path. Yeah. Sort of position myself, in a smaller company setting, by will most of the time. Yeah. When Marquetta acquired us, I didn't want to be there. We were, at that point, we got acquired in at 100 people. And by the time I decided I can't be there anymore, it was like almost 200. Yeah. There's too much, bureaucracy keep creeping it. You have to know it's your life, right? You have to know where you do best and what you really want to be doing. And that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
But we'll see. I'll do what I can. What I have to do to keep this company moving forward to the extent that I can. With business, you never know how well.
I know, you got to go where water's flowing. So tell me how you came up with the name. Where does the name from?
Oh, that was actually way harder than you think. Oh my God, I had so many stupid ideas. I showed you the folder and the what's it called, the Google Doc of all the names that we were going through.
Oh, that's so fun.
Stupid. There were many.
Don't lose that. That's history.
Yeah. There were a lot of examples. I got a lot of my friends. A lot of the feedback they gave me was basically, this is the dumbest sounding name I've ever heard. Not smart. A lot of the stuff he came up with in the beginning. But yeah, it was just a process of just spitting things out, conceptualizing sort of what you want the brand to be about. And then eventually, there was a point I landed on, what was it? Spar for some reason. I can't remember how it came up. And I felt like it was on the right track. I sent it to, actually, one of the girls I sent it to was at the pickleball courts at the Presidio when you were there.
Yeah.
And she was like, oh, that sounds a little too short and too, fighterish, whatever. I was like, okay, whatever. Sat on it, came up with some other stuff. And eventually, I was like, Spar sort of sounds like Sparta because I have some affinity towards like ancient Greek, Roman culture.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I could just cut the Sparta kiss part and then landed on Sparta. I was like, oh, 2 syllables. This sounds interesting. And then I was thinking about it, circulated that around. It got less negative feedback than all the other ones.
It is good though. I mean, when you think about it, like, it is a competitive sport. It can be fun, but that does have that element of like, Roman Sparta, that's great. I think it's a great name and very, it's very memorable, and I think your branding's great. So thank you for sharing. Teaching me a little bit more about paddle construction and about your past and your future. I think I always find it really interesting to hear sort of the dots that were connected into the business that you start. That is for sure the only way you get somewhere is by learning in every piece of your career. So it's really exciting. And I'm excited to see when the Ballista comes out and your launch, and, keep us posted on what's coming next for you. And so just super excited. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I'll see you on the course.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to Simply Pickleball. We will be back very soon with great interviews, discussions, and more, all about pickleball. Don't forget to subscribe to our channels on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, or any of your favorite podcasting outlets. Until next time, happy dinking.